Hello and welcome. Hope your week's off to a great start. I'm Daniel Che for this Monday evening's edition of Arirang News. Let's start with the headliners. President Park Geun-hye punched in for work on Monday after battling with illness following her South American trip. She immediately addressed contentious issues, including pension reform plans and investigation into a major bribery scandal in Seoul-Tokyo relations. 4 South Koreans are detained in North Korea. Some are accused of espionage, others for illegally entering the communist state or allegedly trying to set up underground churches there. Experts warn the detainees could be used as bargaining chips against the South. In March, South Korea posted a current account surplus for a 37th straight month, reaching the highest level since a record $11.3 billion in November 2014. And it seems set to break the 38-month streak recorded back in 1986 June, that is. President Park Geun-hye, who had fallen ill after returning from her recent South America tour, went back to work earlier today. At a meeting with her senior secretaries, she made clear her positions on the main rival political parties' agreed reforms to public pensions, the aftermath of the recent bribery scandal, and criticisms about her policies on Japan. Our Choi You-sun starts us off.
Upon her return from a week-long break due to an illness, President Park Geun-hye addressed bipartisan efforts to revise the country's deficit-ridden public employee pension system. However, she expressed disappointment that the reform plan will only reduce the public burden next year by $3 million a day.
개혁의 폭과 20년이라는 긴 세월의 속도가 당초 국민들이 기대했던 수준에는 미치지 못해서 매우 아쉽게 생각합니다.
The president also raised concerns about a trade-off deal between the two parties to raise the national pension coverage to 50% of a subscriber's nominal income level.
해당 부처와도 사전에 충분히 논의하고 국민적 공감대를 형성한 후에 신중히 결정해야 한다고 생각합니다.
As for a recent bribery scandal involving the country's political heavyweights, President Park vowed to eradicate corruption and sever the collusive ties between politics and business. She said that 2 pardons granted to Song Wan-jong, a deceased businessman at the center of the scandal, should be investigated and a president's right to grant a pardon reviewed. President Park has been under pressure to revise her Japan policy amid concerns Korea has fallen into diplomatic isolation following Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent U.S. visit. She responded by saying Abe has become the target of criticism in the U.S. after his failure to address and apologize for Japan's wartime sex slavery system while addressing Congress. President Park urged officials to continue her two-track approach of taking a hardline stance on historical issues while exercising diplomacy to maintain good relations with regional powers, a move which analysts say reflects her confidence in her foreign policies. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
And Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry has also reaffirmed President Park's two-track policy on Japan. Speaking at the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee on Monday, Minister Yoon Byung-se said the international community is criticizing Japan for its historical revisionism and Korea should cooperate with the U.S., Germany, and the European Union on the history issue, as Tokyo will not change its stance easily. Yoon was referring to Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's failure to apologize to the victims of Japan's system of wartime sexual enslavement during his congressional address at the U.S. last month. The minister added Korea will push Japan to acknowledge history in a statement Abe is set to make in August to mark the 70th anniversary of Japan's defeat in World War II. The country's rival parties may be on a collision course over revisions to the National Pension Fund here in Korea after having reached agreement on revisions to the public servant pension system. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
Lawmakers will vote this week on a long-awaited bill that would revise the pension system for public servants, following an agreement by the rival parties over the weekend. But there is a brewing controversy between them over possible revisions to the National Pension Fund. The main opposition party favors revisions that would raise the amount that pension subscribers would receive in payouts each month after they retire, from 40% of their annual income to 50%. Under their plan, a person who earns roughly $920 a month would receive $460 a month instead of $370. Some ruling party members have objected to the plan, but have yet to offer an alternative because the government will still need to find more money to cover the cost of the plan, either through taxation or by raising premiums. According to the National Pension Research Institute, the number of National Pension Fund beneficiaries will exceed the number of contributors by 2060 because of the country's growing elderly population and low fertility rate. The Welfare Ministry predicts the National Pension Fund will be completely depleted by 2060. A special National Assembly committee will be formed to draw up a relevant bill on the opposition party's plan, with the goal of passing the bill by September. Also, the rival parties predict that some $300 billion in government funds will be saved over the next 70 years if the reforms to the public servant pension system are successful. Korea's pension system for public servants has long faced a looming crisis and run a deficit of $11 billion every year until last year. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
Moving on to the trade front, Korea logged yet another current account surplus in March and is poised to set a new record for month-on-month surpluses. But it's mainly due to slowing imports, suggesting domestic consumption is drying up. Our Kim Min-ji has this report.
Korea posted a current account surplus for the 37th straight month in March. The Bank of Korea says preliminary data shows the surplus hit almost $10.4 billion, up nearly 42% from the same month last year. The figure marks the highest level since a record $11.3 billion surplus in November 2014. At this rate, Korea is likely to break its previous record surplus streak of 38 months, which started back in June 1986. The balance of goods rose to over $11 billion last month, up from about $7.3 billion in February, as imports shrank at a faster rate than exports. Exports fell 8.4% to nearly $50 billion, while imports plunged almost 17% to about $38 billion. It did slow from last year, but falling exports coupled with a drop in imports points to a surplus trend that mainly stems from sluggish domestic demand.
The decline in both exports and imports will likely continue for some time. Although the export volume hasn't fallen that much, export prices have dropped significantly. Imports have also slumped due to a decline in raw material prices and slowing domestic consumption.
The experts said that while Korea will probably hit the central bank's $96 billion current account surplus target for this year, it doesn't indicate an improving economy. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The nation's historic low interest rate has prompted Koreans to borrow more, and they're using most of the money for housing purchases. Experts say while the pace of borrowing money is concerning, the trend is likely to continue. Our Shin Se-min tells us more.
Korean households took out nearly $487 billion in bank loans in March, an increase of $3.7 billion from the previous month. Korea's Financial Supervisory Service says that's the largest gain since it started collecting the data in 2006. The financial watchdog attributes the rapid rise in borrowing to the country's record low key interest rate of 1.75%. The majority of borrowers took advantage of the low rate to buy houses, a move that's in line with government efforts to lift the sagging housing market. Just in Seoul, there were over 13,000 housing transactions in March, up by nearly 50% from the previous month. In February, total household debt rose $3.1 billion from the month before after having surpassed the 1,000 trillion won mark, or $950 billion last year. The total household debt came to nearly $1.2 trillion, an increase of 6%, or $70 billion from 2013. Experts say that while the borrowing speed is worrisome, it is a phase the economy has to endure.
Household debt is an all-time high, and that could lead to a long-term depression, just like it did in Japan. But revitalizing the Korean economy through the housing market, for example, is much more urgent.
Saying that the borrowing trend will likely continue for some time, he added that more fixed-rate mortgage-backed loans like the government's relief loans are needed. The program introduced by the Financial Services Commission in March helps debtors to repay their loans over a longer period of time. Experts say programs like these are one way the government may be able to strike a balance between controlling household debt and reviving the economy by fueling private spending. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Let's move our focus to InterKorean relations. With North Korea's latest detention of a South Korean college student, the regime is now holding 4 South Korean nationals. The government here says it will work for the swift release of its citizens, but there are lingering doubts about that. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
South Korea on Monday urged Pyongyang to release the latest South Korean citizen to be detained by the regime.
The government strongly demands that North Korea swiftly free Ju Won-moon so that he can return to his family.
The 21-year-old Jew has been identified as a permanent resident of the U.S. and a student at New York University. North Korea claims he was arrested in late April while trying to enter the country illegally. The South's Unification Ministry said it would work for Ju's swift release, but there are lingering doubts about its ability to succeed. Ju is not the only South Korean national to be detained in Pyongyang. A South Korean missionary has been held since late 2013 on suspicion of spying and allegedly trying to set up underground churches. In March, Pyongyang said it had detained 2 South Korean citizens and accused them of working as spies for Seoul's National Intelligence Service. South Korea says it has offered to hold talks with the North on the issue. It's also sought help from countries with embassies in both Koreas, but to no avail. With the clock ticking, experts say the government should consider all measures to protect its citizens.
Whether it's holding under the table negotiations, dispatching an envoy, or using mediators, such as Russia, I think it is an urgent matter that must be resolved through inter-Korean talks.
Experts say such detainments will become more frequent if inter-Korean relations remain frosty. They add that the 4 detainees will likely be used as bargaining chips should the 2 Koreas sit down for talks. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
And there's growing speculation that Pyongyang could launch another long-range rocket soon after the North unveiled a new satellite control center over the weekend. But South Korea's defense ministry says a missile test is unlikely to happen in the near future. Na Young-kyung tells us why.
South Korea says there is no indication that North Korea is planning an immediate long-range ballistic missile test. This came at a regular press briefing at Seoul's defense ministry on Monday, a day after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was reported to have visited a new satellite command and control center. Defense Ministry spokesman Kim Min-seok said the facility unveiled on Sunday is different from the one Pyongyang showed to foreign journalists in 2012 before it launched a satellite into orbit. He also said the new center, which is reportedly a lot bigger than the old one, doesn't seem to be operating yet, but added that if it opens, it will allow Pyongyang to have greater control over its long-range missile launches. North Korea has been calling its satellite launches purely scientific, but the international community views them as disguised missile tests because in practical terms, the only difference between a satellite and a missile is what is mounted on the rocket. The North is also known to have been extending its rocket launch pad in Dongchangri on the west coast since late 2013. If successful, officials believe North Korea will be able to launch rockets that are larger than the 30-meter-long Eunha-3 rocket launched in 2012. However, an unnamed South Korean government official said Monday that the extension work will take at least another couple of months. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
An American scientist claims that if worse comes to worse, South Korea could make dozens of nuclear warheads within a 5-year period to counter North Korea's nuclear program. Local experts say this scenario is highly unlikely, but could be possible if Seoul feels like it's been run into a corner. For details, we turn to our Kim Hyun-bin.
Charles Ferguson, president of the Federation of American Scientists, said in a report last week that if the U.S. was perceived as being unable to reliably counter the threats posed by China and North Korea, Japan and South Korea will want to take steps to have their own nuclear capabilities.
Hypothetically, if North Korea perfects its nuclear weaponry and becomes a clear threat to the South, and if the U.S. doesn't provide a nuclear umbrella on the peninsula, Seoul would have no choice but to develop its own nuclear program.
Ferguson says South Korea is currently capable of making 2,500 kilograms of near-weapons-grade plutonium, or enough to make more than 400 bombs, from 4 pressurized heavy water reactors at its Worsung nuclear power plant. He added that Seoul also has the potential to make dozens of nuclear warheads every year within a 5-year period. Local experts say, however, that it is highly unlikely that South Korea would develop its own nuclear program.
South Korea relies heavily on exports, and its economy has developed through trust with the international community. So it is highly unlikely that it will develop its own nuclear program without a clear justification for doing so.
Experts say if the U.S. and the international community keep putting pressure on North Korea over its nuclear program and provide a nuclear shield, Seoul won't have a reason to develop its own nuclear weapons. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Let's move on to sports now. The already impressive trophy cabinet of Korean golfer Park Geun-hye has swelled even further as she stormed to her second victory of the LPGA season. The world number 2 won by 3 strokes after finishing 15 under overall on Sunday at the LPGA Tour's North Texas Shootout. Christy Kerr and Park Hee-young tied for second. This is Park Geun-hye's 14th LPGA Tour title. After sealing victory, Park said she felt her ball striking was solid all week and her putting was back to its best. World number 1 Lydia Ko tied at 41st on even par. Despite her disappointing performance, Ko maintains her number 1 ranking. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you so much for watching. We will be back at 10 p.m. Korea time with more.